All right, so get this. Volkswagen, you know, the German engineering giant, they might actually be closing factories for the first time in like their entire history. 87 years.
Yeah, it's massive. Really a seismic shift,
Why?
because Volkswagen in Germany, it's not just a company, it's woven into their entire economy.
Absolutely.
Biggest employer. And this news has sent shockwaves, like, through the whole country.
It's crazy. At least 3 plants potentially closing. And we've got reports coming in from everywhere, international news, business journals, even Italian papers are freaking out, worried about, the ripple effects this could have. So today, we're going to really unpack this whole situation, right? Break down what's happening, why it matters so much, and what it might mean for, the future of cars.
Yeah, let's do it. We should probably start with just the core facts.
Yeah, for sure.
So Volkswagen is thinking about shutting down factories. It's part of this huge cost-cutting plan, right? Like, they're aiming to save something like 4 billion euros.
Wow. 4 billion.
Yeah, huge.
That's a lot of money.
And to pull that off, they're, considering some pretty drastic measures.
Yeah, this is way more than just a few layoffs here and there. We're talking potential pay cuts, up to 10% for workers, a total freeze on wage increases, and remember those 10 Volkswagen plants all across Germany?
Right.
None of them are considered safe. Closure or downsizing, it's all on the table.
Yeah, it's pretty serious. I think to understand why this is happening, though, we have to look at, all the pressure that Volkswagen's under.
Right, the bigger context.
Exactly. So sales, they're down, right?
Right.
Both in Europe and China. And then on top of that, they're dealing with just this fierce competition from, cheaper Chinese electric vehicles.
Those are everywhere now.
Yeah, exactly. And, meanwhile, labor costs in Germany, they're skyrocketing. AD energy costs, too. It's like a perfect storm.
Plus, and this is a big one, Volkswagen, they haven't exactly been leading the pack in the whole electric car game.
Yeah, for sure.
They've actually fallen behind on, their own goals for EVs, which, only adds more pressure to cut costs and figure out a new plan, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are wondering, why are those Chinese EVs so much cheaper? It's partly because of government subsidies, sure, but it also comes down to labor costs. Chinese manufacturers, they have a huge advantage there. It makes it really tough for, companies like Volkswagen to compete on price.
Right. It really puts them in a tough spot.
It does.
It's almost like they're caught between these external forces, right?
Yeah.
The rise of China, the whole shift towards electric vehicles, and then they've got these internal factors too, like their own maybe missteps in the EV market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And all of this is all happening while the global economy is slowing down.
Oh, right.
So it's not just a Volkswagen story. It's, the bigger picture of how, European manufacturing as a whole is dealing with these huge shifts, global shifts.
Yeah, it's a big deal. But, okay, we've got the context, right? Now let's try to put a human face on this whole thing. Imagine working at Volkswagen for years, maybe even decades, thinking your job is secure.
Right.
And suddenly you're facing, the possibility of losing your livelihood. I mean, no wonder people are upset.
It's a lot, yeah. The head of Volkswagen's Works Council, Daniela Cavallo, she called this plan, get this, a profound stab in the heart for workers. She even accused management of, betraying their trust, not having a clear plan for the future.
And it's not just the workers who are worried, right? The German government, they're getting involved, urging Volkswagen to try and prioritize saving jobs. I mean, they know mass layoffs would be a political nightmare, especially given, how vital Volkswagen is to their economy.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, and this is an interesting point, the German state of Lower Saxony, they actually own a 20% stake in Volkswagen.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just about protecting jobs, it's about protecting their investment.
Right. And then you've got the unions, a major force in Germany. The IG Metall Union, they're one of the most powerful in the entire country, and they're already talking about consequences if Volkswagen goes ahead with these closures.
Yeah.
They're talking about strikes, protests, you name it.
They're not messing around.
Not at all.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. So Volkswagen, they're legally required to have what's called a Works Council. It's basically a group of employee representatives, and they actually get a say in big company decisions, including layoffs and plant closures.
Really? So they can't just go rogue.
No, they can't just
Blech.
act unilaterally. They
Right.
have to negotiate with this works council, which, adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
So to recap, we've got Volkswagen desperately trying to stay afloat, workers fighting for their jobs, the government trying to keep everybody happy, and the unions, throwing their weight around.
Right, right.
It's a high stakes situation for sure.
It is. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
So we've talked about those potential closures and, what it could mean for the workers. But this is a story that's making news, globally. And
Yeah.
every country seems to be kind of focusing on a different angle, It's like
Hmm.
they're all looking at the same thing, but through different lenses.
It's true. It's true. The German media, for example, they're obviously hyper-focused on potential job losses.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and what it means for their economy. They're really getting deep into the weeds on, Volkswagen's cost-cutting plan, all those details.
Oh, yeah. I was just reading this article in Handelsblatt, that German business paper.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're reporting that Volkswagen is aiming to cut a crazy amount. We're talking 4 billion euros in costs.
Huge number.
Huge. 10% wage cuts, salary freezes for 2 years, no more bonuses, benefits cut. I mean, it's drastic.
Yeah, and it's created this, real sense of betrayal,
Mhm.
Remember how we were talking about that agreement Volkswagen had with the unions?
To protect jobs.
Yeah, that's gone. Scrapped last month.
Yeah, a few sources mentioned that. And Daniela Cavallo, that head of the Works Council, she straight up called it a breach of trust.
Strong words.
Yeah. And she said the workers are ready to fight back, and I kind of believe her.
I think so, too. Now, if we, shift over to the Italian media, they're naturally pretty worried about the ripple effects.
Right.
Italy supplies so many parts, components to Volkswagen. So any disruption to production, that's going to hit them hard.
Yeah, I was seeing how some Italian outlets are even comparing this to what happened with their own auto industry, the decline they've seen in recent years.
It's a fair comparison.
They're worried Volkswagen's struggling could be a sign of things to come for other European car makers, which, it's a valid concern when you think about all these bigger trends we've been talking about.
For sure. I mean, if Volkswagen, with all their, size and resources, if they're having this much trouble adapting, what does that mean for smaller companies, the ones with way less money?
Yeah, good point. I even saw this one Italian publication. It was Affari Italiani, I think. And they quoted some union leader who was actually calling for Europe-wide social safety nets
Wow.
to protect workers if there are these big industry shifts.
Yeah.
So they're seeing this as a European problem, not just an Italian one, which I think is, pretty smart, needs a bigger solution.
Absolutely. It's interesting, though, right, how this whole story is playing out so differently depending on, where you are.
Yeah.
The international media, though, they're kind of framing this as a symbolic moment, not just for cars, but for, European manufacturing in general.
Yeah. The New York Times actually called the potential closures a further blow to Germany's already stagnant economy.
Ouch.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
basically highlighting how interlinked Volkswagen is with Germany's economic health.
Totally. And CNBC, I saw that they were pointing out that Volkswagen's struggles are basically a microcosm of, the struggles that all of European manufacturing is facing. Globalization, technological disruption, the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's way bigger than just one company or even one industry. It's a reflection of those fundamental challenges facing Europe as they try to compete in this new world,
It is. It is.
It's kind of wild how the French media in particular, I've noticed, they're focusing a lot on the role of China in all of this.
Yeah, they're really highlighting how much pressure Chinese companies are putting on European car makers with their aggressive pricing and all the advancements they're making.
It's a total turning of the tables, right?
It is. It is.
Volkswagen dominated the Chinese market for years, and now they're getting challenged right back at home. It's got to be unsettling for those European companies.
I would imagine so. It kind of brings us back to that central question. What does the future hold for car manufacturing in Europe?
Yeah, the million-dollar question.
And the answer, unfortunately, it's not simple, very multifaceted.
There's no magic solution, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that's super clear from looking at all these sources, this is a make or break moment for Volkswagen and probably for the whole European auto industry. They have to adapt, innovate, find a new way to compete in this new landscape.
Totally agree. They need to embrace new technologies, streamline things, maybe even completely rethink their business models.
And they have to do all that while dealing with, the politics of it all, the social complexities, job losses, union demands, government intervention. It's a lot to juggle.
A lot, yeah. The stakes are incredibly high. I mean, what happens with Volkswagen? This is going to have a ripple effect, not just for the company, not just for their workers, but for, the European economy and the future of manufacturing in the whole region. This is a big deal.
Okay, so we've laid out all the challenges, right? But is there anything hopeful here? Are people talking about solutions at all?
Some experts, they actually think
Yeah.
that Volkswagen has the potential to turn things around. They've got that strong brand, global reach, and a history of, innovation.
Right, and they are investing a lot in electric vehicles. If they
Yeah.
can, get it right, it could set them up really well for the future.
Absolutely, but it's not going to be easy. They got
Yeah.
to speed up that transition to EVs,
Right.
figure out how to cut those costs without, sacrificing quality, maybe even look into partnering with other companies, even in China.
To, get access to new technologies.
Yeah, and new markets, too.
Yep.
It's a strategy that requires, real boldness. They got to have a vision, and they got to be willing to, break away from tradition.
For sure, and everyone will be watching, right? Investors, analysts, policymakers, workers, everyday people, they're all trying to grapple with these changes. Globalization, technology, the future of manufacturing, it's affecting everybody.
It really is.
It's safe to say this story is far from over, right? We'll definitely keep following it and keep everyone updated on any new developments as they happen.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, we're going to be keeping an eye on those broader trends, the ones shaping the auto industry and, the global economy.
Yeah.
Because understanding those trends, that's key why to making sense of all this. The challenges, the opportunities, everything.
Well said. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to kind of circle back to something we talked about earlier, the human cost of all these changes.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in, the big picture stuff, the numbers, the analysis, but we can't forget about the actual people whose lives are being directly affected by all of this.
For sure. Behind all the headlines, all the financial stuff, these are real people whose jobs, whose livelihoods are on the line. We've heard from union leaders, we've heard from workers, we've heard from government officials, and they're all worried. Job losses, economic fallout, it's scary.
And you can just, feel the anger and frustration, right?
Yeah.
Directed at Volkswagen's management. They're being accused of putting profits ahead of people, and it's a good reminder that these shifts, these big economic shifts, they're rarely, smooth and painless,
Right.
There are winners and losers, and it's on policymakers, business leaders, it's on them to try and find ways to soften the blow. Make sure everyone has a chance to actually benefit from progress, not just get left behind.
I agree. That requires not just economic policies, but social policies too. Things like support systems, training programs, opportunities for those who lose their jobs. You got to help people adapt.
It's a huge issue. No easy answers, but it's something we definitely need to be thinking about as we, try to figure out this 21st century.
Absolutely. Okay, now before we move on, let's just do a quick recap of the key takeaways so far.
Sounds good.
So we know Volkswagen is facing a ton of challenges. Slumping sales, costs are going up, competition from China is fierce, and the move to electric vehicles, it's happening slower than they hoped. And this has forced them to think about some pretty drastic stuff. Plant closures, job cuts, pay cuts. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, and we saw how this is all playing out in the media, right? Each country has its own focus, its own concerns. Germany's worried about jobs and their economy. Italy's worried about the knock-on effects for their own WN car industry. And the international media, they're seeing this as a defining moment for all of European manufacturing.
Yeah, a real test. We also talked about some potential solutions, like Volkswagen's got to speed up their EV transition, figure out how to cut costs, maybe team up with other companies. But we also acknowledge that, there's no quick fix. It's going to be a bumpy road.
And most importantly, we talked about the human side of this story, right? The people whose lives are being directly impacted and the need for policies that actually support them, give them opportunities, don't just leave them behind.
For sure. Great summary. Now, are you ready to, shift gears a bit, explore a whole other side of this?
All right, when you are.
Let's dive into the politics.
Right.
Because the government, they're playing a huge role in how this whole thing is going to shake out.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we've got Volkswagen, right, really trying to, adapt and survive. Workers are understandably on edge about their jobs. And now you've got the government stepping into the ring. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, you can almost like feel the tension, right?
No, totally.
You've got the government, especially Chancellor Scholz, they're publicly pushing Volkswagen to, prioritize saving those jobs.
Mm.
And that pressure is like intense. I mean, Volkswagen is such a symbol for Germany.
Right, it's iconic.
And the potential for like political fallout if they do have these mass layoffs, that's huge.
Yeah, it's not just talk either, right?
No, not at all.
Like the German state of Lower Saxony, they own that 20% stake in Volkswagen, which we talked about. So it's political A&D financial for them.
Exactly. They're trying to protect their investment. But here's the other side of that, right? Volkswagen IS in trouble. Like legitimately. To survive, they need to make cuts, innovate, and do it fast. The government can't just force them to keep factories open if it means, the whole company goes under.
It's like they're telling Volkswagen, we want you to succeed, but you got to make some tough choices. It's like tough love, German style.
It is. It is. And some sources are even suggesting that the government is like starting to realize that.
Oh, really?
They're still pushing for job protection, sure, but now they're also saying that Volkswagen needs to like get more competitive, adapt to the market.
It's about finding that balance. But, we can't forget about the unions in all of this.
No, absolutely not.
They're huge EE in Germany, and they're not just going to sit back and watch all those jobs disappear.
Right. The IG Metal Union, we've mentioned them a few times. They're already making threats, talking about consequences if Volkswagen keeps going down this path.
Consequences, huh?
They're demanding negotiations. They're organizing protests. It's clear they're ready to, put up a fight.
And they'll definitely be putting pressure on the government to, step in and help the workers.
For sure. So you end up with this, three-way tug of war.
Oh, yeah?
You've got Volkswagen trying to stay alive, the government trying to please everybody, and the unions trying to protect their people.
It's economics, politics, social concerns. It's textbook stuff, but it's real people's lives that are, at stake here.
That's the thing. And whatever happens, it'll have major implications, not just for Volkswagen, but for Germany as a whole. The European auto industry. It even plays into that global debate about, what role should the government have in this era of globalization.
Big questions. Okay, we've covered a lot today. The challenges, the potential solutions, the impact on people, the political side of things. It's been a deep dive, for sure. But before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've seen how Volkswagen, this company that's been a symbol of German strength, industrial might, how they're struggling to adapt to this new world. So the question is, what does the future hold for car manufacturing in Europe? And what should the role of government be in shaping that future?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-euro question. And it's tough. The European auto industry, they're at a crossroads. They've got to adapt, got to innovate, find a way to compete with those Chinese companies.
And governments are going to be crucial in that. They can offer incentives, for companies to innovate. They can invest in infrastructure like those charging stations.
Right.
Support retraining programs for workers, create regulations that, make it a fair playing field.
But they also have to be careful not to overstep.
Right.
They can't just prop up companies that are failing. They have to resist the urge to pick winners and losers and make sure that whatever they do is actually going to benefit people in the long run.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Requires careful thought, planning, and honestly, just a willingness to adapt to this constant change that's happening.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's important to remember this conversation, it's not J-side about cars.
No, it's so much bigger.
It's about jobs. It's
Yeah.
about the environment. It's about national competitiveness. It's about, what kind of society we want to build.
Well said. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Volkswagen's uncertain future. We hope you found it informative, engaging, maybe even got you thinking a little bit.
I hope so too. As always, we encourage everyone to keep learning, keep digging, look for different perspectives, form your own opinions. It's a complex issue, and there's no easy answers.
Definitely not. And if you have any thoughts, questions, anything you want to share, reach out to us. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking those tough questions. There's a whole world of fascinating stories out there waiting to be discovered.